Good morning. Here we are once again from my office, and we'll be looking at Genesis chapter 13 today. Genesis chapter 13. So, Abram left Egypt and traveled north into Nivga along with his wife and Lot and all they owned, too. Abram was rich in livestock, silver, and gold. 3. From Nineveh, they continued traveling by stages towards Bethel, and they pitched their tent between Bethel and Ai, where they had camped before. 4. This was the same place where Abram had built the altar, and there he worshiped the Lord again. 5. Lot, who was traveling with Abram, had also become very wealthy with flocks of sheep and goats and herds and cattle and many tents. 6. But the land could not support both Abram and Lot with all their flocks and herds living so close together. 7. So disputes broke out between the herdsmen of Abram and Lot. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land. 8. Finally, Abram said to Lot, "Let's not allow this conflict to become between us and our herdsmen. After all, we're close relatives," which shows us right there where Abraham wasn't fully obedient with God, which I guess means he wasn't obedient at all, because it says back in 12, the Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to a land I will show you." But what did he do? He took Lot with him, and eventually his dad's with him as well. And so, verse 8, we pick back up again. Finally, Abram said to Lot, "Let us not allow this conflict to come between us and our herdsmen. After all, we are close relatives," showing us that he didn't do what God had told him to do. "The whole countryside is open to you. Take your choice of any section of the land you want, and we will separate. If you want the land on the left, then I will take the land on the right. If you prefer the land on the right, then I will go to the left." 10. Lot took a long look at the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley in the direction of Zorah. The whole area was well watered everywhere, like a garden of the Lord, or the beautiful land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Something happened after that, right? Verse 11. Lot chose for himself the whole Jordan Valley to the east of them. He went there with his flocks, his servants, and parted company with his uncle Abraham. 12. So Abram settled in the land of Canaan, and Lot moved his tent to the place near Sodom and settled among the city of the plains. Now, I want you to pick up a couple of things here as we continue on. He moved near Sodom, 13. But the people of the area were extremely wicked and constantly sinning against the Lord. He looked out. He saw what looked to be the best pastures, to be green pastures, great water, everything he needed, except the people were wicked and they sinned before the Lord. Just because it's green pastures isn't always green pastures. Verse 14, after Lot had gone, the Lord said to Abraham, "Look, as far as you can see in every direction, north and south, east and west, I am giving all this land, as far as you can see, to you and your descendants as a permanent possession. The promised land, as we soon will call it, because it was a promise of God to Abraham and all his descendants, which is the Jewish people. 16, and I will give you many descendants that like the dust of the earth that cannot be counted. 17, go and walk through the land in every direction, for I am giving it to you. So Abraham moved his camp to Hebron and settled near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. There he built another altar to the Lord. And so we see the promise of God here in 13 being revealed. We see in chapter 12, God saying, go, I'm going to show you where to go. And he went, and now God says, this is where I want you. This is the place where I'm going to give my people for generations and generations to come. And it will never end. That's the same piece of ground they're fighting over in Israel today. That whole section. The sad thing, and we'll see as we continue on reading, that though God gave them this huge land, they only conquered about a third of what God gave them, settling for less. What a shame it is when we settle for less than the best of God, when we don't take what God has given us and what he's promised us and walk in victory of those things, as we see here in this text that they are doing. And as you continue on, we will see more of the encounters of Abram. Actually, let's just keep going and read 14. Genesis 14. About this time, a war broke out in the region. The king of Babylon and the other kings all came together to fight against the kings. Pick up verse 3. The second group of kings joined forces in the valley on the Dead Sea. For 12 years they had been subject to King somebody, but in the 13th year they rebelled against him. And so we see there this battle takes place, and this battle of the king of Sodom. And the thing that we have to understand is most of the time in this time frame, every little town had its own king. Every little town was its own nation. Every little town belonged to itself. And so all these kings came together against the king of Babylon, because the king of Babylon was trying to take over the world and take over the region. And so they begin to seek out and look out and try to get these things. And so we see that they came on. And if you look down at verse 12, they also captured Lot, Abram's nephew, who lived in Sodom. See, he was on the outside, then he moved in. And they captured the town, and they got Lot too, and carried off everything he owned. Verse 13. But one of Lot's men escaped and reported everything to Abram, the Hebrew, who was living near the oak grove belonging to Mamre, the Amorite. Mamre and his relatives were Abram's allies. 14. When Abram heard that his nephew Lot had been captured, he mobilized 318 trained men who had been born into his household. Then he pursued the army until he caught up with them at Dan. 15. Then he divided the men and attacked during the night. The army fled, but Abram chased them to Harod, north of Damascus. 16. Abram recovered all the goods that had been taken, and he brought back his nephew Lot with his possessions and all the women and other captors. And so Abram went out and fought a battle, got his family. So we see the problem that they caused because of disobedience to God. And that is the continuous thing. We see that with Moses. We see that with so many people, that that they gravitate to people who aren't what is and what God wants, or they partially do what God wants and they try to put their own spin on it, and it gets them in trouble every time. Verse 17, after Abram returned from his victory over the king and all his allies, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley. That is the king's valley. 18, after Methuselah, the king of Salem, and the priest of God's Most High brought Abram some bread and wine. Methuselah blessed Abram and his blessing. Blessed is Abram by God's Most High, creator of heaven and earth, the blessed of God's Most High, who has defeated the enemy for you. And then Abram gave Methuselah a tenth of all the goods he had recovered. We see an offering giving to the church because of the blessing that he had. 21. The king of Sodom said to Abram, give back my people who were captured, but you may keep for yourself the goods you have recovered. Abram replied to the king of Sodom, I solemnly swear to the Lord, the Most High, the creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take so much as a single thread of sandal thong from what belongs to you. Otherwise, you might say, I am the one who made Abram rich. I will accept only what my young warriors have already eaten, and I request that you give a fair share of the goods to my allies. And so we see here that Abram really didn't want anything. He didn't need anything for himself. Why? Because God provided, because God took care of him, because he didn't want it to look like man had blessed him. And he wanted it to be God's blessing. Oh, think about that. His concern was what people thought in the worldly view. He wanted them to think of him as a godly man. How about us today? Do we want that? Do we act as men of integrity, women of integrity, so that God gets the glory and not man? Oh, I sure hope so. I hope you have a great day, and we will pick up tomorrow on chapter 15. God bless.